Hey, what's going on, guys? Kalamazi here, and this, for real this time, is truly, at least at this point, going to be my final Shadowlands beta Warlock feedback document update. Now, I said about a month ago that that one was going to be the last one, but then we had a pushback, and now that pushback, I guess, has been lifted. We have a release date. November 23rd is when Shadowlands will indeed be launching, and I am hyped. I am extremely excited for it, but we have a lot to get done. A lot of videos on the channel, Twitch, YouTube, some overhauls. I've got a lot in store for you dudes, and I'm really, really excited to show you guys that over the next few, I guess, weeks or so heading into Shadowlands. But today, we're going to be looking at the Warlock feedback document one more time. Now, we did update this on stream tonight, but we're going to take a look at it more in depth right here. There are a few bugs I wanted to highlight. We're talking about legendaries, covenants, conduits, Destro, Demo, Aff, and a few other generic changes along the way. Any weak auras, profiles, or add-ons you see here are indeed available to you guys for free on my Twitch. If you want to swing by, hang out, drop a follow, ask any questions anytime, that is the best way to get a hold of me. Be sure to let me know what you guys think of this feedback in the comment section below. Any questions, drop them down there. I'm happy to help. So, let's get right into this. Now, I did try to order each section, starting off with like what I felt was the most important, impactful, I guess, changes that were needed for it. And unlike last time, or I guess the last few feedback documents, we're addressing tuning issues here, I feel. That we're addressing tuning and the issues I feel that are there. So, without further ado, let's get right into this. So, as mentioned, I want to start off with a few generic Warlock, I guess, problems, and then get into these spec-based ones. So, starting off here, the very first one we've had up here for a long time. However, I reworded it a bit for, I guess, the final update. Basically, it says 6-second pet summons are too restrictive when pets die a lot in Mythic Plus and raids alike. There have been plenty of times in Shadowlands beta that my pets have died in mechanics, whether it be Sanguine on Sanguine weeks in Mythic Plus, or boss mechanics, or whatever, and I'll Fell Domination one out, and it dies again 5 seconds later. At that point, I just leave it dead on the floor. As a pet class, especially being a Demonology Warlock at times, it feels terrible. But a 6-second summon is just way too long in PvE. If the change was made so that it would be, relevant to kill a pet in PvP, that's different. Just have it be 6 seconds if it's a PvP-based event, like a battleground, arena, whatever, or if you have War Mode on. If you don't have War Mode on, don't care about PvP, just leave it at 2.5 seconds or whatever it is, I suppose there's also the option of Fell Domination having 2 charges, but that doesn't always work out the way you might plan, because pets die over and over and over. My pet dies every 10 seconds on the 3rd boss in Sanguine Depths. 2nd boss, 3rd, I think, 3rd. It's a bit excessive. The fact that we haven't really gotten any reason as to why it was 6 seconds, and Hunters had to change to 6, but are now back to, I guess, have been changed back to 4 seconds, is interesting. I just want really a response as to why it's still 6 seconds. But I guess in the end, what I really want is a reversion, or I guess a middle ground in a sense. Moving on from that, this change here, having Hellstones despawn at the start of every key, would be a huge boost to Warlock utility in Mythic Plus. I do think that's relevant. At this current point in time, a group can have an alt Warlock, summon him to the actual start, drop Hellstones, and then just log out, and the whole group has 3 Hellstones. So people often cite Hellstones as utility in Mythic Plus for Warlocks, but it really only starts when you get past the first 3 uses, because then you can drop more for the group. But if you can just drop them at the start regardless, like not even have a lock in the group, it really invalidates that bit of utility. There are plenty of buffs that disappear if you start a key or whatever. It doesn't have a class in there. That class, I suppose. And Hellstones need to be the same. That needs 100% to be changed in Shadowlands moving forward. So getting into Affliction here, now I'll try and show some of the changes in game if possible, but for the most part, it just talks about different, I guess, versions of an ability or how it needs to be buffed or changed, in my opinion. Now, Dark Glare has been an issue, in my opinion, for a long time with Affliction. Yes, you do have the actual dot extension with your Agony or Vital Taint Corruption, whatever, when you pop your Dark Glare, which I do think is undervalued quite often. Having the ability to extend your Vital Taint in Mythic Plus on a large trash pull, agonies, corruptions, or whatever what have you, it's relevant because it gives you more time to rapture, to fill with other abilities, and if you generate a shard later on still in your Dark Lair, you can rapture again. But the issue is, though, after a Mythic Plus run, IBM accounts for anywhere from 3 to 4% of your damage. It just feels really, really bad being a major cooldown and doing no damage. Now, like I said, you can't see the actual dot extension, which gives you more rapture value and things, but I really hope that Dark Lair, my hope, my first suggestion here is that Dark Lair casts an AoE Eye Beam on every target that has Agony applied to it. Now, I wanted to initially say Corruption, but the thing is, with Corruption, instead of Agony, you can just cast Seed of Corruption, and it goes on everything for the most part. Having it be Agony, you don't have a way to AoE apply Agony at this point. So you have to sort of choose what mobs have Agony on them, how many, and then go from there. Taking, for example, the first pull in Freehold, if you pull all 3 packs, you're probably not going to Agony all 12 mobs or so. You're probably Agony, 5, 6, 7, 8. You have to make that choice when to stop applying those Agonies and go into your Vile Taint, your Rapture spam. But that would be an increase regardless for Eye Beam damage and would further increase the value of Dark Lair, thus increasing the value of Dark Caller, the 2-minute Dark Lair trait, I guess talent at this point. Now, another option is for Dark Lair, whenever you summon it, to increase our dot's tick rate while keeping the actual dot extension around, and also having it deal more damage to your Unstable Affliction target. Those are both like single target gains as well as AoE in a sense. There's a few options you have here, but just comparing Dark Lair to Infernal or to Tyrant, it just seems so subpar and so lackluster, even with the dot extension being a thing. Unstable Affliction, stacking to 5 is gone. It's limited to 1. So that was a big portion of Dark Lair's damage in BFA, and the other portion was Death Bolt. But Death Bolt's gone now too, at least in PvE. So Dark Lair certainly needs some attention. It's been overlooked for basically all of Alpha and the Beta, but it doesn't really feel like a good cooldown at all. It sort of feels like a waste at this point. So, moving on, Sow the Seeds. Now, this has been a talent that I've also talked about for a while. I personally feel that it feels too similar to Malefic Rapture. Now, Sow the Seeds does scale, and it gain more value in more mob-dense keys, like a Freehold or a Motherlode, like a Sanguine Depths Gauntlet, for example, in Shadowlands. I just personally feel that it's still too similar to Rapture, playstyle-wise. The recent damage buff made a solid option in larger AoE settings, but for a while I was calling for and suggesting a change to Sow the Seeds to have it apply Agony whenever it actually, popped on all the targets, in addition to Corruption. Now, I personally don't think that's too overpowered, but in certain settings, with the Dark Lair changes, it would be. But, I mean, in certain settings, on a large poll, like 12, 13 mobs, which might not even be a thing due to target capping, but if there is, it might get a bit excessive there. But it's important to keep in mind that in this 35 row, Vile Taint and Singularity, you won't have options to access to these. You're taking Sow the Seeds. So it devalues your Rapture damage because you're not taking Vile Taint. It devalues your, your spread damage, your Rapture damage, all of that, because you have Sow the Seeds, applying Agony and Corruption, and also giving some explosion damage as a whole. So, but regardless, feedback has been given on that for a while, and after playing with Sow the Seeds a decent bit on Live and in Mythic Plus, I think the biggest, most impactful change they can make to Seed of Corruption, and to a similar extent Sow the Seeds, is actually to reduce the cast time, because currently on beta right now, I'm at 16% haste, and it's a 2.2 second cast. It takes a long time to cast Seed, with Sow, without Sow, whatever. And when you're going into a pack, casting a Seed, getting your Agonies rolling, getting whatever else, and then going into your Seed spam, quite often with the shard gen Af has in Mythic Plus, you're able to drain soul mobs, you move your UA around for 4 or 5 shards. You can't really dump your shards because a 2.5 second cast just feels bad. And when you have multiple Agonies rolling, you're generating shards pretty quickly to the point where, okay, I'm at 4 shards, 4 or 5, cast Seed, but I'm back to 5 before the next Seed cast finishes. I think a cast time reduction on Seed of Corruption will go a long way for Sow's value. Also for Seed opening up on packs, it would, number 1, add more value to Sow the Seeds. Number 2, help our opening initial setup damage a bit in Mythic Plus, because you normally do open on Seed of Corruption, whether you have Sow or not. And number 3, it's probably just a needed change as a whole. Rapture's cast time is 1.3 seconds right now. This is 2.2. A second might not seem like a whole lot, but it's more than it seems. The other option here is to have it embed 3 Demon Seeds instead of 2, for a total of 4 instead of 3. This would just further solidify its value, utility, in larger Mythic Plus AoE settings by just having it scale even more. Now, I've been casting Sow the Seeds on Live and in 3 or more target pulls for the full 3 seeds, but having 3 seeds or more seeds, it would just help solidify it even more as your main large AoE spender. Vile Taint being your middle ground that's more bursty with Rapture, and Singularity being your mostly single target choice with a bit of pulsing AoE. So that would give a lot of options in this row. I do sort of feel that Sow is still too similar to Rapture, But in the end, so it's an iconic ability. It's been around for a long time, and without really changing it or overhauling it in a certain extent, I think the best, easiest solution is probably to add another seed onto it. But regardless, even if this is not changed, so the seeds, or Seed of Corruption more so, needs to be looked at cast time-wise. I think it's just personally too long. So, moving on to Destruction here, I've added a paragraph at the top here that wasn't here last time. Now, like I said, in this document, we're going past addressing, like, mechanical issues, rotational issues. This is the final update. I want to talk about how I feel for each spec. Number 1 for Destruction. Destro's main issue in Shadowlands is that Chaos Bolt does not hit anywhere near as hard as it should. With the removal of Supremacy, Focus Chaos Nerf, and CD stacking, it just doesn't hit anywhere near where it should, and it feels like a wet noodle. It doesn't feel like a rewarding spender. You have Immolate as your dot, Conflag as your, generation, like Shard Builder, and I guess Haste, CD cast reduction, Incinerate as your filler, and Chaos Bolt as your large dump spell. But Chaos Bolt doesn't hit very hard. It hits, like, nowhere near where Ice Lance does for Frost Mages. That's something in itself, but it just does not hit anywhere near as hard as it should, and that affects Destro's single target, it affects it cleave-wise, it affects it in a lot of ways. Chaos Bolt needs a buff to its damage for destruction to feel competitive in most settings, and it also, to a similar extent, it removes some of our dependence around their Infernal. Now, Destro, in most of BFA, it dealt decent damage outside your Infernal, but, well, I mean, being real here, most of your damage was around Supremacy, and in your Infernal window, which is every 2 minutes. Now, we do have Wilfred's, which gives us a 2-minute Infernal, but we don't have any kind of damage amp. So, like, outside of it, all you really have is just, rolling your Immolates and your Conflags, your Incinerates, but, like, what does it really do? Like, the Incinerate hit for 3k when it crit, my Bolt hit for 6k, but, like, it might seem like a little bit, but it's really not that much. Like, comparatively to what it does on live now versus an Incinerate, it's massive. Supremacy's gone, the stacking damage is gone. When you have your Infernal, yeah, sure, it's great with Random Chaos if you're playing it, but let's be real, like, Roaring Blaze is probably a better option when it comes to single target in the first place. And Roaring Blaze also does not even buff Chaos Bolt's damage to begin with, so, like, I don't really want Roaring Blaze to suddenly affect Chaos Bolt at this point. I think because, like, that'll just mean when you're playing Random Chaos, or if you're ever playing Grimoire of Sacrifice, it becomes a wet noodle again. Chaos Bolt just needs a buff, in general, for Destro. It really, truly does. If it's not buffed, Destro's just going to hit like a wet noodle. And, I mean, it sort of already is, and I don't want that carrying over into Shadowlands. Number 1, there are a handful of fights in Nathria. It just needs a buff. But that's really much it. That's really it. The Roaring Blaze build with Incinerate, Conflag, all the damage amps here, Immolate, Incinerate, Soulfire, Conflag. It's fun. It's exciting. But, like, it doesn't have the same reward, the same feeling as launching a Chaos Bolt does. You know it's going to be a hard-hitting spell, but it's just not. It's the same Destro toolkit we've had for a while, but without the Chaos Bolt damage. It just needs a buff. It's needed one for a while, and we're coming onto the line here. It really needs some help. Number 2, this has been here for a while, but the reduction of Soulfire CD from 1 minute to 45 seconds is a welcome change. What I basically am getting at here is Soulfire initially used to give you an instant cast Incinerate whenever you cast it, but now it applies Immolate. You can Havoc this for 2 shards. It does work that way. You can Havoc your Soulfire, but the problem is like, when you go into your Havoc window, a good bit of the time you already have your Immolates rolling, or you'll apply it at the start for charge and early on, instead of like Havocing and then trying to cast a 3.5 second Soulfire. So it sort of doubles down on your Immolate uptime and pushes it to max Pandemic, and you lose value. It's just awkward. Soulfire worked better in a Havoc window with an instant cast Incinerate, because you could Havoc that. It worked better in your opener. You could pre-cast a Soulfire, travel time, then cast the Immolate. They hit at the same time, and you pull the boss. It's just awkward now. So I hope that this is changed back to Incinerate. I think it goes a long way for the spec and just makes it feel better as a whole. Also, with this being a 3.5 second cast time, I'd love to see it affected by Backdraft. That would be awesome. It would feel really good, and honestly, it would make Soulfire a contender in the first row here, whether it's single target or AoE. The next row here, Fire and Brimstone's damage output is just subpar. I know it's also there for shard generation in a sense, but the shard generation is subpar as well as the damage. You're taking Cataclysm or Fire and Brimstone in pretty much single target or AoE or both. Like, it's just not where you want to be Fire and Brimstone needs help. At this point, you had previously you had the Necrolord Decimating buff, or Decimating Bolt, like, damage amp there, but that was gutted, like, a month ago, and it was destroyed. It is not good anymore. Fire and Brimstone really need some help there, and I'm just hoping... We're not getting it back to toggleable ability, being baseline. I just hope that we see a damage buff. The shard is probably not horrendous. It's okay. It complements Destro's toolkit probably well enough, but 40% damage to surrounding mobs is just not enough. It just needs help. Maybe a bit of shard gen buff, but a damage buff as well. It's just, it can't compete with Inferno, with Rain of Fire, Rain of Chaos, Wilfred's, all that going on. And Kata's where you want to be even outside of Inferno. Like, having the ability to apply multiple immolates at once feels so good. And the actual, like, impact damage, or I guess, you know, burst damage, whatever you call it, is good here too. It just needs help. And I mean, I think the best option is bringing it baseline, but at this point in beta, it's probably not going to happen. So hopefully it's addressed before it goes live. The final ability here is, this is sort of like wishful thinking. It basically talks about the lack of abilities that Destro has that you can cast on the move. You really only have conflict rate. You can cast Rain of Fire technically, but it's going to be a DPS loss single target. You know, unless you're capped on shards or in your Rain of Chaos window or just whatever. You don't really have a whole lot. And also, Soulfire not giving you instant cast Incinerate, that is a tiny bit of utility there as well, or lack of it on the move. My hope here is that I call for like a return of Shadowburn being baseline or Fell Flame. No, I don't think we're going to really see returning abilities here. It's just a bit awkward that Destro's had this problem for a while in, BFA, and we're going to have the same thing in, well, Shadowlands at this point. Listen, Fell Flame's a personal favorite of mine. I'd love to see it back. Somebody can cast in the move. It's awesome. And at the same time, you know, Shadowburn kind of that baseline would be legit, but once again, it requires you to replace a talent here with something else, which, hey, you know, Rolling Havoc. Being real here, Rolling Havoc's too powerful for this row here. Wishful thinking, but regardless, as a whole, I think Destro feels okay, like toolkit-wise feels okay, but it just needs some help. So obviously, like normal, saving the best for last, we have Demonology. I'm going to say Demonology's baseline toolkit rotationally feels fine. Obviously, some things can be improved, which we're going to talk about here. The issue with Demo, which we'll get to more here, it's just undertuned, and it needs a buff. So, starting off, number one is the Grimoire Felguard issue. Basically, this talks about Grimoire Felguard going to a 1.5 minute cooldown instead of 2. Now, I know that, well, I imagine, like, Blizzard knows what they're doing. They know what they're doing. Like, this was changed to a 2 minute cooldown with less than 2 days before BFA went live. It was 1.5 minute. It's a powerful CD. And in my mind, they probably realized or thought to themselves, like, you know, this is a really strong cooldown. Probably the change to 2 minutes was there to make it like a bit different rotationally. Because, I mean, in the end, like, hey, I'd love to have my really powerful cooldown align with my other really powerful cooldown on CD and go from there. But Vile Fiend already does. You know, so having like Vile Fiend, Grimoire, Tyrant all on the same CD would feel great. And I think it should be that way. I sort of understand the ideology of maybe wanting to break it up a bit, have push back your Tyrant a bit, but that also makes Vile Fiend awkward. Now, making Grimoire Felguard a 1.5 cooldown would fix all of this. Even if it requires a bit of a nerf to its like damage or whatever, so be it. I'll take it. The way consumption works right now, with siphoning health from your pets, your Vile Fiend, your Felguard, it's certainly worth holding for the damage increase, the extension, and the actual bonus that your Tyrant gets from demonic consumption. Having Grimoire Felguard as a 1.5 minute cooldown would go a long way in making Demonology feel just so much better. So much better rotationally in Shadowlands. It really, truly would. And that's probably like my number one hope for, outside of getting buffed, for Demonology at this point. Number 2 is Nether Portal. Now, the thing with Nether Portal is, first of all, I love Nether Portal. Like, it's an awesome ability. I love it. It's one of my favorite talents ever. But in the end, like, it doesn't see any play. First of all, because, well, being real, demonic consumption is incredibly OP, probably too strong. But Nether Portal is an odd 3 minute cooldown that you cast and you send your demons that you summon with your Tyrant, but it gives you this weird Shadowbolt hand gameplay to summon like random demons from the portal. It's not based off how many demons or how many shards you spend going into it. It's quite literally based off of, for every time you spend shards, you summon a demon. So number one, my hope is that this won't make a huge difference, like damage-wise, it really won't at all. But it's that like Nether Portal has changed from that odd wording every time you spend soul shards to, I guess, whenever you spend soul shards, you summon X demons, and X is equal to the number of shards that you spent. Obviously, it needs to be worded a bit differently, but that's what I want. It just makes mechanics like rotational fluidity just feel better, you know? It wouldn't really make a DPS difference because you're casting the same amount of Shadow Bolts, the same Hand of Gul'dans, the same Call Dreadstalkers, whatever, but just for, like, rotational fluidity, in a similar sense to Grimoire Felguard, it just needs to be that way. Demonology, like, has the tools, but it just feels a little clunky at times. I hate using the word clunky because it's not very descriptive, but it's just true. It feels awkward rotationally. Yeah, I'm ready for this, but I want to hold this. Or, you know, we never cast, you know, one-shot Hand of Gul'dans unless you're using another portal every 3 minutes with your Tyrant, and it's just awkward, you know. Plus, hey, you know, 3-minute cooldown, 2-minute cooldown, minute-and-a-half cooldown, 45 seconds. They're all just super awkward at this point. The timing could be made so much tighter for Demonology, and it would just feel so much better. But to the same extent, though, like I said, the actual changes to Nether Portal, if that happened, it still wouldn't make up for the fact that it's undertuned. Nether Portal needs a buff. It feels like, with it being a 3-minute cooldown and what you can do with your Tyrant with this, it feels like it's supposed to be our big single-target 3-minute nuke ability. But you don't even burst as high as you do playing Demonic Consumption by a long shot playing Nether Portal. I burst like 5k with Consumption. I burst like 3.2, 3.3. It's not good. It's just way undertuned. It was buffed in early alpha. It needs a bigger buff by a good bit, or double the demons that come out of it. Something. It needs help. It's a 3-minute cooldown, and even if this was a 3-minute cooldown, like it affected every other Tyrant, even if Consumption made it your Tyrant a 3-minute cooldown, it would still be miles better than Portal at this point. It just needs help. To a similar extent, there's a lot of synergy with talents, legendaries, and conduits for Demon Bolt. One being Saxels. You have Necrolord. I made the video a few days ago. You have Decimating Bolt from Necrolords. You have Balespider's Burning Core. You have Power Siphon from the Shadows. You have Saxels. You have the Soul Conduit interaction with Saxels. The problem is, even with all those abilities taken into account, and Saxels being your final max talent row, big Shadow Bolt, Demon Bolt damage amp, once again, honestly, like, playing the huge Demon Bolt build, the best option, like, you know, I guess theoretically, would be something like this. You play, like, Strength from the Shadows, you'd play Power Siphon for Demon Bolt amp, Shadow Flame amp, one of these two would work with Saxels, depending what you're wanting, because Demon Bolt amp. But you know what simmed the best, or you know what played the best? You weren't even playing Saxels. You weren't even playing from the Shadows. You're playing Vilephiend, Grimoire Felguard, and Demonic Consumption. Why? Because Decon's too strong. I don't want to say too strong. It's not too strong. It's just these two are undertuned. And Decon sort of like pigeonholes you into playing Vilephiend and Grimoire Felguard, because of the changes with them draining health now and the extension it brings to these pets and everything. It's just sort of awkward. Saxels and Portal have been just really, really undertuned ever since early BFA, when Decon was buffed and things, and changed and found, discovered and all that stuff. They just need buffs. They need substantial buffs. And to be fair, Saxels should just be a baseline ability at this point. It sort of feels like a passive you just learn at a certain point. But they just need buffs. The Demon Bolt build plays very differently from normal Demonology. You don't, I mean, if you were like going into the full Saxels build with this and Power Siphon, like, you have these 12-second from the Shadows windows with Power Siphon and Decimating Bolt and all these things. It's really, really fun. But instead, you're playing the same build because certain things just raw power levels off the chart and way undertuned. So my hope is that Saxels and Portal end up getting buffed for Demonology. They really need help. I'd love this to be our de facto go-to in raiding. For like single target fights, Decon being your Mythic Plus talent, and this being, I don't know, some utility, some middle ground kind of, I guess maybe Demon Bolt build. I'd like that. Affliction has a lot of play in almost every single row. You know, Creeping is good, Soul Conduit's good, Dark Soul's good, but in this, Demonology just feels like you just come in here and run this build and you don't mess with it much. It's just, that's just it. It needs some help tuning-wise there. Now, the final point I want to hit on here, regardless of all the Nether Portal, Saxels tuning, and all that, even with Decon, Demonology has just been suffering for a long time, ever since the stealth Demonic Consumption nerfs. Even before then, it was still sort of underpowered with damage on beta. When you have your Consumption and your big CDs, your damage is really good. It'll outburst Destro and Af, but your consistency outside of that is just not good. You're down there like with the tank damage. It is really, really bad. I think a good way to buff that or to change that, I'm being a bit excessive here. It's not tank damage, but, well, depending on some tanks, they actually have better damage than us. Have you seen prop pallies lately? But being real, our damage outside of our tyrant window is just not very good. I think the best way to address this is just Fel Firebolt damage. It's a big part of our damage. Just buff Fel Firebolt damage. You could buff, like, your Felguard a bit, but you already have damage amps for that in, like, Fel Commando and different conduits. I think Fel Firebolt damage is a good bet. Just buff it by a certain amount. It's consistent. We're casting mostly hand of ruled ends outside of, like dogs on CD or whatever. Just buff Fel Firebolt. I think it'll go a long way for the build, both Demon Bolt wise, that build if you play it, Demonic Consumption wise. Just a solid overall buff. And our imps are our biggest part of our damage. They're the most consistent thing we have. That'll help with consistency. Just buff that. Those are my hopes for Demonology. In the end, I think Demo's not in a bad spot. The toolkit is there. Just there are some abilities that need to be tuned a bit, like brought up, and some probably need to be maybe like brought more in line with others. But the consistent damage outside of consumption, that's been an issue for a while, and that really needs to get addressed. But if it is, the toolkit is there, and there are 4 Patrick bosses in Castle Nathria. You very well might play Demonology in there if things are buffed and tuned properly. And hey, running a build like this, the big dogs build, boys, by the way, it's still there in Plus. It's got a lot of potential in Mythic Plus too. So that's what I'm curious about. Hopefully Demonology gets the tuning that it needs. Okay, so now that all of these spec-based feedback and tuning, all that's out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about legendaries, covenants, and conduits for Warlocks, which we've hit on a little bit before, but with the expansion being less than a month away, there are a few things I want to be addressed. Number 1, legendary-wise. So this was pointed out to me recently in a Discord message. The Sacrilege Dark Strike, the Corruption Slow effect, has its slow effect removed from the target if another Warlock applies Corruption, if they're not wearing the same legendary. So I don't have a second Warlock in my group here, but I tested it earlier on stream. So if I put up Corruption, I'm wearing legendary. There's Corruption, there's the effect. If another Warlock comes along, regardless of the spec, and puts Corruption on his target, it will, I guess, it won't like override my individual dot, but it will remove the actual slow. Now, I mean, who knows in the end if the Sacrilege slow Corruption effects when you played in a whole lot of settings, but it could be. And if you are a Warlock playing Ath that's just, assigned to slow and add or whatever, on like ANR or on Agrimar or whenever it was used last time, or in Mythic Plus, for example, and another Warlock comes along and puts Corruption up like he should, if he's playing Ath, that is. Don't worry about that, sure, Demo. If he's playing Ath and it removes your effect, that's really awkward. It seems like a bug or an oversight, but it's certainly worth drawing attention to at this point because things are getting pretty close to going live. The second effect here, legendary-wise, that I want to talk about, and this has been one that I've debated bringing up for a while, is the Malefic Wrath legendary. It has an 8-second duration, but you can manage it. It's just not the easiest at times, more or less when you're playing this legendary rotationally. My suggestion, or I guess want, an extension of the duration to 10 or 12 seconds would greatly improve gameplay with legendary. The duration could also be a baseline 8 seconds, but extended to a max of 12 if you refresh the actual buff early. So, like, what I'm getting at here is, if you're playing this effect and trying to maintain it in Execute, or just in general, playing as legendary, I'll pull up my pet. So, let's open up here. We're playing Soul Conduit as well. So we have most of our dots up. Scouring Tithe, we'll go Singularity, we'll go Dark Glare. I'm going to drain 3 stacks of Shadow's Embrace here, and we will Rapture to 3 stacks. Now, we might get some Soul Conduit refunds here, but we'll Rapture once more. We'll drain a little bit. So my goal is to try and keep the Rapture Legendary rolling here. I can refresh once. I need to Rapture now. Refresh UA, refresh Agony. But depending on your refunds here, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, especially at lower levels of haste. You can see dots are falling here. I can refresh, I think now, maybe? Barely caught it. We're getting decent, like, refunds with Soul Conduit, but playing, like, Dark Soul or playing Creeping Death earlier in testing, depending on your early shard refunds, it gave you very, very, very little room to refresh the buff. Now, it might be intended that they don't want you to maintain it the whole time, but this playstyle already sort of forces you away from your Rapture windows. You're not, like, holding your Raptures for Singularity and blasting. You're trying to maintain a 3-stack here. So, I don't think it needs a damage nerf. I just think a tiny bit more duration on it would make it a lot easier and just, like, to play with and just feel better. as a whole. You know, it's not hard to maintain Dots' app. I don't want to confuse anybody with that anywhere. It's just like, it's just the shard generation or lack thereof at certain points in time. Whether you get Soul Conduit refunds, you're playing that, and just the RNG aspect of it. I think a bit of a duration extension will give you a lot more wiggle room and just make you feel a lot better as a whole. So moving on to conduits. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, for the most part, lock conduits, I think, are in a pretty good spot. Some have been buffed, some have been nerfed, but for the most part, I'm happy with them. So, Malignancy, solid. These are all solid, you know. Oh, here. So, basically, everyone I'm happy with for the most part, right? Now, tuning-wise, some can be buffed a little bit, maybe nerfed a tiny bit, but I'm happy with where they are for the most part. I didn't really feel the need to give feedback on any of them, except for one. Duplicitous Havoc. Now, I will say, the Destro Conduits are sort of odd. Ashen Remains was nerfed. This was nerfed by a lot. It was really good, so it needed to be nerfed. This has been dumpstered. They took this out back and shot it a month ago. This is over. My conclusion with Infernal Brand is they can't figure out how to tune Reign of Chaos around Infernal Brands. They just nerfed it. I thought it'd be an issue early on. It is what it is. So, the thing with Duplicitous Havoc, though, was it makes Havoc transfer 15% more damage. So, it's not dealing 15% more to every target. It's only dealing 15% more to the target that has, like, Havoc applied to it, which takes 60% of your main target's damage passively. So, it's taking 75 instead. Now, this is like rank 5, I think, is Conduit. It's a bit less at lower ranks. This is 213 versus 145. But for the most part, like, to me, I haven't run Sims or anything with it, but I feel like Ashen Remains, you're going to have Immolate on both targets anyways. It's a permanent buff to your main target when Havoc's down and buffing both when you're Havocing. It just seems a little better to me in that setting. This is a lower eye level. And to a similar extent, if you're setting up a Havoc window, you're probably conflagging twice in it because Havoc was, 1, extended to 12 seconds in Shadowlands. And number 2, I mean, like, getting the actual Immolate damage amp on 2 targets is going to be strong with Combusting Engine. It just seems that Duplicitous Havoc is in an odd spot. A 15% damage amp on a target that's taking reduced damage already doesn't seem like that good, especially for an ability that has a 30-second cooldown. So my thoughts here are to change Duplicitous Havoc, move it away from the damage increase. I feel a shift away from the percent damage increase to an actual Havoc duration increase would greatly benefit the Conduit, make it much more desirable in cleave settings. Now, like I said, Havoc has already had its duration increased by 2 seconds in Shadowlands. I believe you learn it at level 58 or so. I don't know if you can see it here. You can't. But I'm not saying add on, you know, a max rank 10 seconds. That's ridiculous. Crazy excessive. But I'm saying, like, baseline, maybe have it add on, like, 2 more seconds for, like, 14, and max rank, maybe, like, 1 or 1.5. And, like, max rank have it be, like, 4 seconds, maybe. Because you're not going to see max rank conduits for a little while. Probably at least until, like, the second raid tier. But I think it would go a long way. Instead of it being a 12-second, you know, ability with a 30-second cooldown, it'd be, like, a 15 with a 30. And it might not seem like a lot, but 3 more seconds is probably going to translate to more than 15% damage, depending on haste levels and things. I think it could very well be worth it. And that compared to, like, having an actual duration increase compared to a CD reduction on it, I think is more impactful, because a duration increase allows you to pop, like, your Dark Soul or your Infernal or whatever and get more value out of that comparatively to a CD reduction. Because if you're popping your CDs with a 12-second Havoc, when it comes back around, like, around off CD again, they're going to be over. So I think an extension's better there. I could be wrong with this, but I just think it makes it more flashy, more exciting, and probably just better as a whole. And it brings it from, like, a weird, unplayed Conduit, I feel, to something that's probably a decent bit better. And finally, the last thing I want to talk about is Covenants. Covenant tuning and more or less Covenant abilities. So, starting off with Night Fae. When it comes to Night Fae, the Soul Rot ability, I feel, needs to empower your Drain Life cast for the next 8 seconds, which is the duration of the dot, if it hits 2 or more targets. This would stack further with ID from Affliction to Talent, all that stuff, but that's okay. It's a bit of a niche kind of interaction. At this point, it's not even worth pressing the Drain Life ability for the most part once you cast your Soul Rot, whether it's single target or AoE. Now, the thing with Soul Rot's dot, you have to be careful with this, because pound for pound, second for second, it's the strongest dot we have when playing the Soul Rot Conduit that increases its damage. But the issue is it only lasts 8 seconds comparatively to, like, well, IC, which lasts 12. So there's a bit of like Rapture window play there with AF, and just as a whole, a bit of a longer duration, plus utility with Impending Catastrophe, but you have to be careful with that. I think having like in an AoE setting, have it empower drain life would be a good step in the right direction without having it become too OP in single target. Because Kyrion's a solid choice for us for Destro and AF, but Night Fae is pretty close behind it. And this is not me wanting to not play a Night Fae, I'd rather not. But being real, like, I just don't want it to be too OP. So I think in like an AoE setting, empowering the drain life would be a solid idea, but single target wise, I think it's okay where it's at. But that would help fix like the AoE drain life, I guess, issue of not even casting it in the first place, unless you're playing after the ID. And playing after the ID means you're not taking Drain Soul, which is a problem in itself. But when it comes to Venthyr, the IC Impending Catastrophe ability, the nerf it got like a month ago really hurt its damage and I guess overall playability in Nathria outside of like these massive AoE fights, which there really aren't a whole lot of. It's still a decent option for AF in Mythic Plus with Rapture, because the dot does count towards Rapture's damage count. As you can see, like, we can't cast a Rapture here, but if we go big IC and try to Rapture, well, we can Rapture now. Plus, the actual curses being applied are also relevant. Hey, look, it's still smart cursing. It's really cool. So, like, my thoughts on IC, about a month ago with the same nerfs, they doubled the damage that Soul Rot's dot deals to your main target, the target that you put the ability on. I think to a similar extent, the IC bomb, like the dot, the big blob of whatever red animal you're casting, when it hits the target, it'll like explode and put the dot on surrounding mobs. If there's no surrounding mobs and it only hits one target, increase the damage it deals to your target, like the main target. Similar to what Soul Rot does. Just increase this, which effectively sort of increases the single target damage of this. Now, I don't want it to be better than like Kyrian or Night, well, better than Kyrian. The Night Fae tuning is sort of similar to Venthyr, but it lost so much value single target wise because of this nerf. They nerfed the impact damage by 80%, and they nerfed the actual dot by like 50%. It gives you a bit more value when it comes to like single target or raiding, I guess, non-AoE settings. And in Mythic Plus, hey, you still got a lot of value. And the curse aspect of this is actually being undervalued a bit, I think. But it would bring up Venthyr from like the bottom dumpster where it got nerfed to, back to being a decent solid choice. It might not be like the best choice in raiding, but it's pretty good in Mythic Plus. And depending on what you're trying to do and focus on, if you're more Mythic Plus based comparatively to raiding, it's important to try and find the best universal covenant that works best for what you're doing and okay in other areas. And I think that change to Venthyr would really help it a whole lot, and it really wouldn't hurt. It really wouldn't make it OP in Mythic Plus or like that. It'd be solid. The final covenant here. Now, listen, Nekvar Lord is a bit of an interesting case because Nekvar Lord has been through, I'm rubbing my head, so many changes with Drain Soul and Fire and Brimstone and all that. I'm not even going to mention Fire and Brimstone here. It is what it is. We're talking about Affliction for this for the most part. The change from 3 Drain Souls to 1 was acceptable, which it was. The 3 Drain Soul playstyle was really restrictive. If you messed up your rotation in any way, shape, or form, your damage plummeted. Having to like clip a Drain Soul cast or missing one because of a mechanic coming at you or whatever really hurt your damage as AF. And it made it hard to play with, also with the Legendary that gave you an 8-second window to Rapture, or to drain in between Raptures. So the 3-to-1 change was acceptable. Nekvar Lord were still solid for us at one charge. However, they nerfed the damage from a baseline 200 to 400 in execute to 100 and a max of like 180. I think it's like 170 in execute at like 0%. This was such a massive nerf and so excessive. So just like a blind shot in the dark nerf. It was so incredibly just excessive. It's way too much. It took Nekvar Lord from being our best covenant by a smidgen to just in the absolute dumpster. Just garbage for AF. Just garbage. It's not good. Like, it was nerfed so excessively. Now, there was also a change 2 weeks ago to the Conduit, the Prolonged Decimation one. It's now called Fatal Decimation. Prolonged Decimation gave you a chance to not consume a stack of Decimating Bolt like the Drain Soul amp or the Incinerate amp or whatever when you cast it. That Conduit is also gone now. It's now Fatal Decimation, which like empowers the missiles that the ability. It's not good. It empowers like the damage of the ability of Decimating Bolt. It's not good. So that being removed on top of the 3-to-1 drain cast and also the actual damage just being gutted, Nekvar Lord needs to be looked at again for Affliction, and maybe a bit for Destro. Demo's the same. Nothing really changed there. Obviously, the damage amp being hit this much affected all 3 specs, but it needs to be looked at again. Now, it's hard finding like a middle ground for Aff because going back to 3 charges of Drain Soul, it makes the playstyle a bit rough. You can do it. It's just you don't have a lot of time with low levels of haste. It's not hard to maintain the dots. You just quite literally have an opener of like 20 spells in a row you have to cast optimally. It's like precast Haunt, precast UA, Agony, Corruption, Siphon Life, Singularity, Dark Soul, Berserking. Let me think, what else? Dark Glare, Drain Soul, 3 stacks of Shadow's Embrace, Rapture 3 times, Drain Soul, Rapture, Drain Soul, Rapture, Drain Soul, and Refresher Haunt in there too. That's like 19 abilities. Like, and if you messed one up, everything was pushed back. You lost so much damage. It's excessive. But like removing that Drain Soul from 3 to 1 was fine. It made it feel okay. I think 3 to 2. To the same extent, like bringing back Drain Soul with 2 charges with an increase to the damage amp, maybe like a baseline 150 to 250 would be totally fine. Prolonged Decimation is gone. The high-end RNG of that Conduit is no longer there. And yeah, it might be like strong and execute, but that's okay. You know, Locks have had execute before, and I think it would make it strong and single target, but not like the end-all be-all. You play this and it's incredible, or you don't bother with anything. I think it's fine. Like, it's also, well, and being real, it's okay in Mythic Plus, like for Aff, but it's not as good as like Venthyr, Impending Catastrophe, with the curses and the AoE dot and the rapture damage. It's more of a niche single target thing. It would make Fire and Brimstone a little better for Destro, but I mean, they nerfed that anyway, so it doesn't really make much of a difference regardless. I think it would really change the playstyle and just make it feel better. Execute damage is relevant. So like if Necrolord, for example, simmed at like, let's say 5.3k, right, with Drain Soul, all that stuff, with this current build here. 5.3k for Necrolord, but Kyrion's like 5.4k, or maybe like 5.35. A bit better. Chances are pretty high I'd still take Necrolord, because execute damage is relevant. It might not keep up with the Kyrian lock for, you know, a good portion of the fight, but like, hey, when you get to the end part of the fight, we want to kill the boss, or like Sire Denathrius, hard execute check. Guess who's going to crank? The Necrolord, Drain Soul, Execute Warlock. It's not all just raw numbers in the end. I think like it's going to be hard to tune this, but I feel this is a good solid middle ground with Conduit being on. The damage amp needs to be readdressed, reevaluated, and going back to 2 drains, I think is a solid middle ground. I really do. The final thing here is that the Venthyr ability and Decimating Bolt have a pretty long travel time, which I would like to see changed. The bigger thing for Decimating Bolt is if you cast it on a low health mob and it dies while the missiles are traveling and spinning through the air and doing whatever they're doing, you don't get the damage amp. The cool thing would be Decimating Bolt like snapshotting the health of the mob that you're casting it on when the Decimating Bolt casts finish, not 8 seconds later when it hits the mob. That's a cool quality of life change. I think it should probably be there, honestly, because you want to cast it, if you're playing Necrolord for whatever reason right now, at a low health percentage. But waiting too long sort of messes you up. And the visual of 18 missiles flying left and right, okay, it's cool, but like, I want to hit the mob. I want to do damage. So I think that'd be really cool and a cool quality of life change. So yeah, for the most part, that's about it though, guys. This is probably going to be the last update for the feedback document. I think we hit on everything pretty well here. I tried to avoid a lot of the tuning when it came to like the initial changes and just seeing where Blizzard wanted to take it. But at this point, we have less than a month before the expansion launches. And I think Aff's in a pretty good spot, like rotationally, mechanically. I mean, Demo sort of is and sort of Destro is to a certain extent as well. But tuning is just not totally there, I feel personally. And I'm hoping that with this document update, probably being the last one, we were able to highlight some of the issues and some of the glaring issues. God, I'm terrible. Some of the issues, and hopefully have them addressed. So, thanks for watching, guys. Now, like I said, this should indeed be the final Warlock Shadowlands beta feedback document update that I put out, unless things are pushed back again, but I don't think that's going to happen. At this point, being real, I think the dungeons, the raids, and the zones as a whole are pretty much done in beta. Yeah, tuning is still a bit off, I feel, which is why we're giving feedback on that, and the questing experience probably needs a little bit of help, but those are things that can change over the course of a few weeks. most of the like baseline systems, the big ones, I think are done for the most part. I'm really excited for release, and I hope you guys are too. I just want Warlock to be as fun, as exciting, and honestly as competitive as possible. I think for the most part, the feedback in this document hit on the things that still need to be addressed. Now, obviously, I left some things out that probably some of you guys want to see, like Metamorphosis Demonology, or having other, you know, things that just don't really make much sense with the direction they've taken Warlock or that spec for Shadowlands. Now, in the end, I prefer Metamorphosis Demonology over the Demonology we have now, but they're not going to be overhauling Demo with 2 weeks to launch. It's just not going to happen. So it's important to keep that in mind and keep feedback relevant to what they are doing with the class. Once again, any week or profiles or add-ons you see here are indeed available to you guys for free on my Twitch if you want to swing by and grab them anytime. Let me know what you guys think about the video and the feedback in the comment section below. And I guess if I missed anything, because technically I can go back and update the document a little bit. If you guys have any feedback, leave it in the comment section. I'll definitely check it out. Any questions, drop them there as well. I'm also happy to get back to you there. Thanks again for watching, dudes. If you guys want to see more WoW content and help support the channel, be sure to smash the subscribe button below and hit that like button while you're down there as well. Thanks again, dudes, and I'll catch you all again soon. Peace.